The diner staff refuses to serve a black man named Samuel, sending him away without a second thought. But 2 hours later, he returns in a uniform that leaves them shocked. What will happen when those who wronged him are forced to face the truth about the man they dismissed? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Samuel Davis pulled his weathered pickup truck into the parking lot of the Starlight Diner. The neon sign flickered against the darkening sky, casting a warm glow over the chrome-trimmed building. He let out a deep sigh, his broad shoulders sagging with exhaustion. The long shift at the factory had taken its toll, leaving him bone-tired and hungry. As he climbed out of his truck, Samuel straightened his back and adjusted his worn work shirt. Despite his fatigue, he carried himself with an air of quiet dignity. His eyes, though weary, held a glimmer of strength that spoke of a man who had faced countless challenges and emerged standing tall. The diner's retro charm brought a faint smile to Samuel's lips. It reminded him of simpler times, even if those times weren't always kind to folks like him. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling burgers wafted through the air, making his stomach growl. As he approached the diner's entrance, Samuel could see a handful of patrons inside through the large windows. An elderly couple sat in a booth, sharing a of pie. At the counter, 2 men in trucker caps nursed steaming mugs of coffee, engaged in quiet conversation. The bell above the door chimed softly as Samuel pushed it open. The warmth of the diner enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cool evening air outside. For a moment, he stood in the doorway, allowing his eyes to adjust to the bright fluorescent lighting. A hush fell over the diner as heads turned to look at the newcomer. Samuel felt the weight of their stares, a familiar discomfort settling in his chest. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the countless times he'd faced such scrutiny before. The waitress behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, seemed to hesitate. She glanced nervously between Samuel and the other patrons, her hand hovering over a stack of clean menus. Samuel could feel the tension in the air, thick and uncomfortable. He'd hoped for a quiet meal, a chance to recharge before heading home. But as the seconds ticked by and the silence stretched on, he realized that his presence had disrupted the peaceful atmosphere of the diner. Taking another deep breath, Samuel straightened his posture and met the waitress's gaze. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a silent plea for simple human decency. He'd faced far worse than this in his life, both on the battlefield and in everyday encounters, yet each time it stung just as sharply. As the moments passed, Samuel found himself at a crossroads. Should he stay and assert his right to be there, or should he leave to avoid potential conflict? The weight of his decision hung heavy in the air, mirroring the larger struggles he faced in a world that often judged him based on the color of his skin, rather than the content of his character. Samuel stepped further into the diner, his eyes sweeping across the bustling interior. The chatter of patrons and clinking of cutlery filled the air, but as he moved deeper into the room, a subtle shift occurred. Conversations hushed and heads turned in his direction. Undeterred, Samuel approached the counter where Edna, the waitress, stood wiping down the surface with a rag. He offered her a polite smile, his voice warm and steady as he spoke. "Good evening, ma'am. Is there a table available?" Edna's hand stilled, the rag clutched tightly in her grip. She barely glanced up at Samuel, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and heavy. Samuel cleared his throat softly, maintaining his composure. "Excuse me, miss? I was wondering if I could get a table." Finally, Edna looked up, her eyes cold and distant. She made no effort to hide her disdain as she gave Samuel a once-over. Her body language spoke volumes, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched, and a deliberate step back from the counter. "We're full," Edna said curtly, her voice laced with poorly concealed hostility. She gestured vaguely around the diner, though Samuel could clearly see several empty tables. "Besides," she added, her tone dropping to a near whisper, "we don't serve someone like you here." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Samuel felt a familiar ache in his chest, but he didn't let it show on his face. He'd faced this kind of treatment before, and while it never stopped hurting, he'd learned to stand tall in the face of it. By now, the entire diner had fallen silent. All eyes were on Samuel and Edna, the tension in the room palpable. Some patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others watched with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Samuel took a deep breath, his hands resting calmly at his sides. He was acutely aware of the weight of the moment, of the choices before him. Part of him wanted to walk away, to avoid the confrontation that seemed inevitable. But another part, the part that had faced down enemies on the battlefield and injustice at home, urged him to stand his ground. As he stood there, caught in this moment of decision, Samuel could feel the eyes of every person in the diner on him. The air was thick with anticipation, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The room fell into a stunned silence. The regular customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Samuel felt the sting of rejection deep in his chest, but he remained calm, refusing to lose his composure in front of the hostile crowd. Samuel's eyes widened slightly, shocked by Edna's blatant discrimination. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking again. His voice was low and measured, tinged with a hint of sadness, but still dignified. "Ma'am, I understand you might have some reservations, but I assure you, I'm just here for a meal. Nothing more, nothing less. I'd appreciate the same service you'd give to anyone else who walks through that door." Edna's face contorted into a sneer, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Samuel. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with cruelty as she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you deaf? I said we don't serve your kind here. Now leave before I have to call someone to make you leave." The public humiliation was almost unbearable. Samuel felt a lump form in his throat, his heart heavy with the weight of years of similar experiences. He looked around the diner, hoping to find a friendly face or someone willing to stand up for him, but all he saw were downcast eyes and uncomfortable expressions. Realizing that he wouldn't be served, Samuel straightened his back and lifted his chin. He gathered what remained of his pride, determined not to let them see how deeply their actions had wounded him. "I see," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Thank you for your time." With those words, Samuel turned and walked towards the exit. The diner remained eerily quiet, the only sound the soft tapping of his shoes on the linoleum floor. As he reached for the door handle, he paused for a moment, his hand trembling slightly. He looked back over his shoulder, taking in the scene one last time. The shame was palpable, hanging heavy in the air. Some of the customers couldn't meet his gaze, their discomfort evident in their fidgeting hands and averted eyes. Samuel pushed open the door, the little bell above it tinkling softly. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he left behind a diner full of people grappling with the weight of their silence and inaction. As Samuel walked to his car, the weight of the diner's rejection hung heavy on his shoulders. The cool night air did little to soothe the ache in his heart. He paused for a moment, his hand on the car door handle, and glanced back at the diner's large window. That's when he noticed her, an elderly woman named Mabel, sitting alone at a booth near the window. Her wrinkled face was etched with sympathy and regret as she looked at Samuel. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Samuel saw the conflict in her gaze. Mabel's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. She wanted to stand up, to say something, to challenge the injustice she had just witnessed. But fear kept her rooted to her seat. The weight of years of social norms and expectations pressed down on her, making it impossible for her to move. Samuel recognized the look in her eyes. He had seen it many times before, the silent apology of those who knew better but were too afraid to speak up. He gave her a small, sad smile, acknowledging her unspoken words. As he climbed into his car, Samuel felt the crushing weight of not just Edna's cruel words, but of the entire community's silence. Each person in that diner who had looked away, who had pretended not to see, was complicit in the injustice he had faced. The engine rumbled to life, and Samuel took one last look at the diner. Through the window, he could still see Mabel, her eyes now downcast, shame evident in the slump of her shoulders. The sight made his heart ache even more. As he pulled away from the curb, Samuel felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. The hurt was still there, raw and throbbing. But beneath it, a familiar determination began to take root. He had faced discrimination before, and each time it had only strengthened his resolve. This injustice, like the others before it, would not go unanswered. Samuel knew he couldn't change the entire town overnight, but he also knew he couldn't stay silent. As he drove down the quiet street, leaving the diner behind, He began to think about what he could do to address this situation. 2 hours later, Samuel's car pulled up to the diner once again. This time, he wasn't dressed in his casual clothes. Instead, he wore his full military uniform, pressed and polished to perfection. The medals on his chest gleamed in the soft glow of the streetlights. Samuel took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. He wasn't here for revenge or to cause a scene. He was here to stand tall, to show his true self, and to challenge the assumptions that had led to his earlier mistreatment. As he pushed open the diner door, the little bell above it chimed softly. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over the room. Every head turned to look at the newcomer, and jaws dropped in astonishment. Samuel stood there, his posture straight and proud, his eyes scanning the room calmly. The transformation was striking. Gone was the tired traveler from earlier. In his place stood a decorated war hero, his presence commanding respect and attention. Edna, who had been loudly recounting her version of the earlier incident to a group of regulars, suddenly went quiet. Her face, which had been flushed with self-righteousness, now drained of color. She stared at Samuel, her eyes wide with shock and growing realization. The other patrons in the diner seemed frozen in place. Forks hovered midway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. They all recognized Samuel now, not as a random black man to be dismissed, but as someone who had served their country with honor. Samuel's medals caught the light as he moved, drawing everyone's eyes. There was the Purple Heart, speaking of his sacrifice. The Bronze Star, a testament to his bravery. Each shining piece of metal told a story of service, of courage under fire, of a man who had risked everything for his country. The silence in the diner was deafening. Samuel could hear the tick of the clock on the wall, the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. He took a few steps forward, his shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. Edna stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The smug smile she had worn earlier was long gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Samuel stood tall, his presence filling the diner with an undeniable aura of dignity. Edna's shock quickly turned to panic as she realized the gravity of her earlier actions. Her face flushed red, and she stumbled out from behind the counter, wringing her hands nervously. I didn't know," Edna stammered, her voice shaky and barely above a whisper. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize who you were." Samuel's gaze remained steady, his expression calm but firm. He didn't speak, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the diner. Edna continued, her words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to justify herself. "You have to understand we have certain ways here. I was just trying to keep things the way they've always been." Her excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. The other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, unable to meet Samuel's gaze, while others stared in awe at the medals adorning his uniform. Edna, still flustered, tried again. "Please, sir, let me make it up to you. Anything you want on the house. It's the least I can do." Samuel finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Ma'am, I didn't come back for a free meal or for apologies. I came back to show you that the color of a person's skin doesn't define their character or their worth." His words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity. The diner patrons looked at each other, then back at Samuel, many nodding slowly as the truth of his statement sank in. And Charlie, the diner owner, burst through the kitchen doors, his face flushed and his eyes wide with panic. He'd heard the commotion from the back and realized the gravity of the situation. Forcing a wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he hurried over to Samuel. "Sir, I am so sorry for this misunderstanding," Charlie said, his voice overly cheerful and strained. "Please, let me make it right. We have a lovely booth by the window, the best seat in the house. It's all yours and your meal is on us today." Samuel stood still, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Charlie's nervous energy. He looked at the owner with steady eyes, unmoved by the sudden change in attitude. "Thank you for the offer, sir," Samuel replied evenly, "but I'm not here for special treatment." Charlie's smile faltered for a moment before he plastered it back on. Of course. We just want to make sure you're comfortable. Right, folks?" He looked around at the other patrons, seeking support. The diner customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some nodded half-heartedly, while others couldn't meet Charlie's gaze. The air was thick with a mix of shock and shame. They all knew what had happened earlier, and Charlie's transparent attempt to save face only made the situation more awkward. Mabel, the elderly woman who had watched Samuel leave earlier, spoke up softly from her seat by the window. "Charlie, I think we all know this isn't about a free meal or a nice table." Charlie's fake smile dropped completely as he turned to face Mabel. He knew she was right, but he didn't know how to fix this mess. He looked back at Samuel, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine remorse. "You're right," Charlie admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm truly sorry, sir. Not just for today, but for every time we've turned someone away because of the color of their skin. I don't know how to make this right." Samuel nodded slowly, acknowledging Charlie's words. "Recognition is the first step," he said, "but it can't stop there. Real change takes more than words. It takes action." The diner fell silent as Samuel's words sank in. The patrons looked at each other, then back at Samuel and Charlie, the weight of the moment settling over them all. Samuel took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Charlie's with a calm intensity. The diner remained silent, every ear tuned to the conversation unfolding before them. "Mr. Charlie," Samuel began, his voice steady and clear, "I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand something important." Charlie nodded, his earlier nervousness replaced by a solemn attentiveness. Samuel continued, "This uniform shouldn't have been necessary for me to earn respect or a seat at your counter. It's not the clothes that matter." A collective intake of breath rippled through the diner. Samuel's words, spoken without anger but with quiet dignity, seemed to hang in the air. "The medals on my chest don't make me more worthy of kindness or basic decency than any other person who walks through that door," Samuel said, gesturing towards the entrance. "The color of my skin doesn't change who I am inside." Mabel, still seated by the window, nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. Other patrons lowered their heads, shame evident on their faces. Samuel looked around the diner, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "We all bleed the same color. We all feel pain, joy, and love. The uniform I wear represents service to all Americans, not just some." Charlie swallowed hard, his earlier bravado completely gone. "You're right, sir. We've been wrong for so long, and I'm truly sorry." Samuel's words and demeanor sent ripples through the crowd. People began to stir, whispering among themselves. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted from tense to reflective. Edna, who had been standing frozen behind the counter, stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, and her voice trembled as she spoke. I'm sorry too. I've been so wrong." Samuel turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you, ma'am. Recognizing our mistakes is the first step towards making things right." The quiet dignity in Samuel's stance and words seemed to touch everyone in the diner. It was clear that his message was sinking in, challenging long-held beliefs and attitudes. Word of Samuel's encounter at the diner spread through the small town like wildfire. By nightfall, it seemed everyone had heard about the decorated war hero who had been turned away, only to return in full uniform. The incident stirred up intense debate among the townsfolk, with many expressing shame over how Samuel was treated. At the local barber shop, men gathered to discuss the events. "I can't believe we let that happen in our town," said Bill, a middle-aged mechanic, shaking his head. "That man fought for our country, and we treated him like dirt." Others nodded in agreement, but some remained silent, uncomfortable with the topic. The tension in the air was palpable. Meanwhile, at the town's weekly bridge club meeting, the ladies couldn't stop talking about it. "I heard he was so polite even after they were so mean to him," whispered Martha, her eyes wide. "It just breaks my heart." But not everyone was on board with the idea of change. Edna, who had become the center of attention, staunchly defended her actions. At the diner the next day, she stood behind the counter, her face set in a hard line. "I don't care what anyone says," she declared loudly to a group of regulars. "I was just doing what we've always done. Why should we change now?" A few of her usual supporters nodded along, but others looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her words. As the days passed, the town seemed divided. Some, inspired by Samuel's dignity, began to question their long-held beliefs. They talked about making changes, about treating everyone equally. But others, like Edna, dug in their heels. They clung to their prejudices, afraid of what change might bring. Many stayed quiet, unwilling to publicly acknowledge the tension in the town. They went about their daily lives pretending nothing had happened, even as the atmosphere around them crackled with unspoken words and conflicting emotions. The incident at the diner had opened a wound in the community, exposing the deep-seated prejudices that had long been ignored. As the town grappled with these issues, Samuel's quiet dignity and powerful words continued to echo in the minds of many, challenging them to confront their own beliefs and attitudes. Marie Thompson sat at her desk in the small office of the local newspaper, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. She had heard whispers about the incident at the diner, and her journalistic instincts were on high alert. This was a story that needed to be told. With determination in her eyes, Marie grabbed her notepad and headed out to find Samuel Davis. It took some asking around, but she finally located him at the town's community center, where he volunteered teaching chess to kids. As Samuel wrapped up his lesson, Marie approached him. "Mr. Davis," she called out softly. "I'm Marie Thompson from the Oakville Gazette. I was hoping I could talk to you about what happened at Charlie's Diner." Samuel's face tightened and he shook his head. "I appreciate your interest, miss, but I don't want to cause any more trouble." Marie's heart sank, but she wasn't ready to give up. "Please, Mr. Davis, your story is important. It could help our town face some hard truths." Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and weariness. "Young lady, I've seen what stirring up trouble can do. It's not always pretty." But Marie wasn't backing down. Her voice filled with passion as she said, "Sometimes we need to stir things up to make them better. Your dignity in the face of injustice. It's inspiring. People need to hear about it." Samuel stood quietly for a moment, considering her words. He could see the fire in Marie's eyes, the genuine desire to make a difference. It reminded him of his younger self. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, Miss Thompson. I'll talk to you. But not here. Let's go somewhere quiet." They found a small park nearby and sat on a bench under an old oak tree. Samuel took a deep breath and began to share his story. He talked about growing up in the South, facing racism at every turn. He spoke of joining the military, hoping to prove his worth, only to return home and face the same prejudices. "The hardest part," Samuel said, his voice heavy with emotion, "is knowing that these attitudes are still so deeply rooted in our communities. Even when people don't say it out loud, you can feel it." Marie listened intently, her heart breaking for the pain Samuel had endured. She could see the toll it had taken on him, but also the strength that kept him going. As Samuel opened up, Marie realized this story was about more than just one incident at a diner. It was about the ongoing struggle for equality and respect, a struggle that was far from over. Marie sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she poured her heart into the article. She knew this story was important. It wasn't just about Samuel, but about the entire town and the hidden prejudices that lurked beneath its surface. As she wrote, Marie felt a mix of emotions. There was anger at the injustice Samuel had faced, sadness for the pain he'd endured, and hope that her words could make a difference. She carefully crafted each sentence, making sure to capture Samuel's dignity and strength in the face of discrimination. When she finally finished, Marie read through the article one last time. Her heart swelled with pride. This was her best work yet, she was sure of it. With a deep breath, she hit the print button and headed to her editor's office. "Here it is, Mr. Johnson," Marie said, handing over the pages. "I really think this could make a difference in our town." Mr. Johnson, a balding man in his 50s, took the article with a tight smile. "I'll take a look, Marie. Thanks." But as Marie watched him read, her heart sank. Mr. Johnson's face grew more and more troubled with each paragraph. When he finished, he set the pages down and sighed heavily. "Marie, this is well written," he began, his voice hesitant. "But we can't publish this." Marie felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "What? Why not?" Mr. Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's too controversial. Some of the town's most influential people. They won't like this. We could lose advertisers, subscribers." "But it's the truth," Marie protested, her voice rising. "Don't we have a responsibility to report the truth?" "Sometimes the truth is complicated," Mr. Johnson replied weakly. I'm sorry, Marie. My decision is final. Marie left the office, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She felt defeated, her hopes crushed. But as she walked home, her sadness turned to determination. She wouldn't let this story go untold. The next day, Marie visited Samuel to share the bad news. To her surprise, Samuel didn't seem discouraged at all. "Don't give up, Marie," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your words have power. If they won't listen here, someone else will." Inspired by Samuel's unwavering spirit, Marie made a decision. She would submit her article to larger media outlets, ones that weren't beholden to the town's power structures. It would be a long shot, but she had to try. That evening, Marie sat at her computer, researching national newspapers and online publications. She carefully crafted cover letters, explaining the importance of the story and why it needed to be told. With each submission, Marie felt a mix of nervousness and hope. She knew the odds were against her, but Samuel's words echoed in her mind. Her story had power, and somewhere out there, someone would listen. As Marie's article began to circulate beyond the town's borders, its impact rippled through the community, like a stone thrown into a still pond. The story of Samuel's experience at the diner and the larger issues it represented sparked intense discussions on street corners, in living rooms, and at local businesses. Many townspeople, moved by Samuel's dignity in the face of discrimination, rallied to support him. They organized meetings to discuss ways to make their community more inclusive and welcoming to all. Some even started a petition to have Edna fired from her job at the diner. "It's about time we face this," said Tom, the local hardware store owner, during one such meeting. "We can't keep pretending everything's fine when folks are being treated this way." But not everyone shared Tom's perspective. A small but vocal group, led by Edna and some of her regular customers from the diner, pushed back against what they saw as unwelcome change. "This is our town," Edna declared loudly at a town hall meeting. "We don't need outsiders coming in and telling us how to live. If they don't like it here, they can leave." Her words were met with a mix of cheers and boos, highlighting the growing divide in the community. The tension was palpable, with neighbors who had once been friendly now eyeing each other with suspicion. Samuel, for his part, tried to stay above the fray. He continued to go about his daily life with the same quiet dignity he had always shown, but he couldn't help feeling the weight of the town's scrutiny every time he stepped out his front door. One afternoon, as Samuel was leaving the grocery store, he encountered Edna in the parking lot. She glared at him, her face twisted with anger. "You happy now?" she spat. "You've gone and turned the whole town upside down." Samuel took a deep breath, fighting to maintain his composure. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I didn't do anything except ask to be treated with respect. That's all any of us want." Edna scoffed and stormed off, leaving Samuel standing there, his grocery bags heavy in his hands and his heart even heavier in his chest. As the days passed, the town seemed to teeter on a knife's edge. Would they come together and confront the uncomfortable truths Marie's article had brought to light? Or would they allow fear and prejudice to drive them further apart? Samuel sat at his kitchen table, staring at the invitation in his hands. The crisp, white paper felt heavy, laden with the weight of responsibility. Marie had organized a town meeting, and she wanted him to speak, to share his story, to be the voice that might finally break through the walls of prejudice that had stood for so long in this small southern town. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words again. The memory of that day at the diner flashed through his mind. The cold stares, the harsh words, the sting of rejection. It had left a deep wound, one that was still healing. "I don't know if I can do this," Samuel muttered to himself, shaking his head. Just then, the phone rang. It was Marie. "Samuel?" Her voice crackled through the receiver. "Did you get the invitation?" "I did," he replied, his voice low and hesitant. Marie sensed his reluctance. "I know it's asking a lot," she said softly. "But your story, it needs to be heard. You have the power to make people understand." Samuel closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought about all the times he'd faced discrimination, all the silent battles he'd fought. Maybe it was time to speak up, not just for himself, but for others who couldn't. "It won't be easy," he said finally. "But you're right. It needs to be done." He could almost hear Marie's smile through the phone. "Thank you, Samuel." This could be the start of real change. As he hung up, Samuel felt a mix of fear and determination wash over him. He walked to his bedroom and opened his closet, pulling out his military uniform. His fingers traced the medals pinned to the chest, each one a reminder of the battles he'd fought for his country. If I could face war, he said to himself, I can face my neighbors. Over the next few days, Samuel prepared for the meeting. He wrote and rewrote his speech, each word carefully chosen to convey his experiences without anger or bitterness. He wanted to open hearts, not close them. The night before the meeting, Samuel couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with thoughts of what might happen. Would people listen? Would they understand? Or would he face the same hostility he'd encountered at the diner? As dawn broke, Samuel rose from his bed, feeling tired but resolute. He put on his uniform, the fabric familiar and comforting against his skin. Looking in the mirror, he saw not just a man, but a symbol of hope for change. You can do this, he told his reflection. Your voice matters. With a final deep breath, Samuel stepped out of his house, ready to face whatever the day might bring. The town meeting awaited, and with it, the chance to spark a transformation in his community. The town hall was buzzing with tension as people filed in, filling every seat and lining the walls. Samuel stood at the back, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of countless eyes upon him, some curious, others hostile. As Marie introduced him, Samuel took a deep breath and walked to the podium. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Good evening, Samuel began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I stand before you not just as a black man, but as an American who has proudly served his country. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some nodded encouragingly, while others avoided his gaze. For years I wore this uniform, Samuel continued, gesturing to his chest adorned with medals. I fought alongside men of all colors, all backgrounds. We bled the same blood, shared the same fears, and fought for the same flag. His voice grew stronger as he spoke about his experiences in the military, the camaraderie, the sacrifices, the pain of losing fellow soldiers. The audience listened intently, some leaning forward in their seats. But when I came home, Samuel's voice cracked slightly, I found that the country I had risked my life for still saw me as less than human in some places. He recounted the incident at the diner, his words painting a vivid picture of the hurt and humiliation he'd felt. As he spoke, he noticed Edna shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes downcast. It's not about a cup of coffee or a seat at a counter, Samuel said, his voice filled with emotion. It's about dignity. It's about being seen as a human being, worthy of respect. Tears began to flow freely among some in the audience. An elderly veteran in the front row wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. Even some who had entered the hall with skepticism on their faces now looked troubled, as if seeing the world through new eyes for the first time. I don't stand here seeking revenge or to shame anyone, Samuel continued, his voice softening. I stand here asking for understanding, for empathy, for change. As Samuel's words echoed through the hall, a mix of emotions swept through the crowd. Some people nodded vigorously, while others sat stone-faced, their prejudices too deeply rooted to be swayed by a single speech. As the town hall meeting came to a close, a buzz of conversation filled the air. People stood in small groups, their faces animated as they discussed Samuel's powerful speech. The atmosphere was electric with a newfound sense of possibility. Marie watched from the side of the room, her heart swelling with hope. She saw neighbors who had never spoken before now engaged in deep conversation. Even some of the town's most conservative residents seemed to be reconsidering their views. Samuel stepped down from the podium, his legs a bit shaky from the emotional toll of sharing his story. As he made his way through the crowd, people reached out to shake his hand or pat him on the back. Their eyes were filled with a mix of admiration and remorse. Thank you for your bravery, sir, an older gentleman said, his voice thick with emotion. I never realized. I'm sorry for what you've been through. Samuel nodded, touched by the man's sincerity. He felt a warmth spreading through his chest, replacing the hurt that had resided there for so long. Marie pushed through the crowd to reach Samuel. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears and pride. You did it, Samuel, she said, grasping his hand. You've opened their eyes. Samuel smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over him. "We did it," he corrected her gently. "Your persistence made this possible." As they stood together, more people approached them. Some offered apologies, others shared their own experiences with discrimination. The air was thick with emotion, but also with a palpable sense of change. Edna, the waitress who had refused to serve Samuel, hesitantly approached. Her face was etched with shame and regret. "Mr. Davis," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I was wrong." Samuel looked at her, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. He nodded, accepting her apology with grace. "Thank you, Edna. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." As the evening wore on, plans began to form. People talked about forming a community council to address issues of inequality. Others suggested diversity training for local businesses. The energy in the room was infectious, filled with a collective determination to do better. Samuel and Marie exchanged a look of cautious optimism. They knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but this felt like a significant first step. The town that had once turned Samuel away was now embracing him and the change he represented. As the crowd began to thin, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had spoken his truth, and people had listened. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about paving the way for a better future for everyone in the town. As the moon hung low in the night sky, casting long shadows across the quiet town, Samuel made his way to his car. The excitement and hope from the town hall meeting still buzzed in his veins. He couldn't help but smile, thinking about the positive changes that seemed to be on the horizon. But as he approached his vehicle, his heart sank. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of shock and disbelief. There, sprawled across the side of his car in angry, jagged letters, were hateful racial slurs and threats. The red paint dripped down the once pristine surface, a stark reminder that not everyone in town was ready for change. Samuel's hands shook as he reached out to touch the cruel words. The paint was still wet, smearing under his fingertips. He felt as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. After everything he'd been through, after baring his soul to the town, this was how some people chose to respond. Word of the vandalism spread quickly through the small town. People gathered in small groups on their porches, whispering in hushed, horrified tones. The act of hate had shaken the community to its core, leaving many feeling ashamed and angry. Marie heard the news and rushed to find Samuel. When she saw him standing there, staring at his defaced car, her heart broke. She approached him slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Samuel, I'm so sorry. This is terrible." Samuel turned to face her, his eyes filled with a pain that made Marie's chest tighten. "I thought we were making progress," he said, his voice cracking. "I really thought things were going to change." Marie felt a wave of guilt wash over her. "This is my fault," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "If I hadn't written that article, if I hadn't pushed you to speak out." Samuel shook his head, but the doubt was clear on his face. "You were just trying to do the right thing, Marie. We both were. But now, I don't know. Is it even worth it? All this pain, all this struggle. For what?" The weight of his words hung heavy in the air between them. Marie wanted to reassure him, to tell him that it was worth it, that change was coming. But as she looked at the hateful words scrawled across his car, she found herself at a loss. Samuel ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older and more tired than Marie had ever seen him. "Maybe it's better to just keep your head down, you know? Not make waves, at least then." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Marie reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Samuel, But before she could continue, Samuel pulled away. "I think I need to be alone right now," he said softly. "I need to think." As Samuel walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Marie felt her own resolve crumbling. She watched him go, wondering if their fight for change had been in vain, and if the cost of speaking out was simply too high. Samuel stood in his small apartment, his hands trembling as he folded a shirt and placed it in his suitcase. The weight of the past few days pressed down on him, making each movement feel like a struggle. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the framed medals from his military service hanging on the wall. They seemed to mock him now, reminders of a country he had fought for but still didn't fully accept him. The image of his vandalized car flashed in his mind, causing a sharp pain in his chest. Those hateful words, dripping with red paint, felt like they had been carved into his very soul. Samuel sank onto the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. "What's the point?" he whispered to the empty room. "Why keep fighting when nothing ever changes?" He thought about all the times he had faced discrimination, even in uniform. The diner incident wasn't the first, and now it seemed it wouldn't be the last. The town meeting had given him hope, but that hope had been cruelly shattered by a can of spray paint and a heart full of hate. Samuel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the town he had thought might become his home. Now, it felt alien and hostile. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every passing car a possible attacker. The peace he had sought here now felt like a naive dream. He returned to his packing, methodically folding clothes and placing them in the suitcase. With each item, he felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief at the thought of leaving this place behind, and sadness at the realization that he was, in a way, giving up. As he reached for his military dress uniform, still hanging pristinely in the closet, Samuel paused. He ran his fingers over the medals, remembering the pride he had felt wearing them into the diner. But now that memory was tainted by the knowledge that even those symbols of his service weren't enough to shield him from prejudice. "Maybe it's better to just go," he murmured to himself. "Find a place where I don't have to fight every day just to be treated like a human being." The thought of leaving felt both liberating and defeating. Samuel had never been one to run from a fight, but this battle seemed endless and exhausting. He wondered if there was any place left where he could truly belong, where the color of his skin wouldn't be a constant source of judgment and hatred. As he continued to pack, Samuel's movements became more decisive. The idea of a fresh start, away from the pain and disappointment of this town, began to take root in his mind. Yet, with each item he placed in his suitcase, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts. Was leaving really the answer? Or was it just running away from a fight that needed to be fought? As Samuel zipped up his suitcase, a soft knock on the door made him pause. He hesitated, unsure if he wanted to face anyone in his current state. But the knocking persisted, gentle yet insistent. With a deep sigh, Samuel walked to the door and opened it. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw Mabel standing there, her kind face etched with concern. Behind her stood a small group of people, including some of the regulars from the diner. To Samuel's shock, even Edna was there, looking uncomfortable but present, her husband by her side. "Samuel, dear," Mabel said, her voice trembling slightly. We heard about what happened to your car. We've come to help clean it up." Samuel blinked, struggling to process what he was hearing. He looked past Mabel to the others, noting their ashamed expressions and the cleaning supplies they carried. "We brought soap, water, and paint," one of the men said, holding up a bucket. "Figured we could get that mess off your car and make it right again." Samuel's gaze landed on Edna, who was staring at the ground, her face a mix of shame and defiance. Her husband nudged her gently, and she finally looked up at Samuel. I'm sorry," Edna said, the word seeming to catch in her throat. "What I did, it wasn't right. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I'm here to help." Samuel stood in stunned silence, his eyes moving from face to face. These were the same people who had sat by silently when he was refused service, who had averted their eyes when he faced discrimination. Yet here they were, offering to help undo the hateful act that had nearly driven him away. "We should have stood up for you before," Mabel said, her eyes filling with tears. "We were wrong, Samuel. So very wrong. Please, let us try to make it right." Samuel felt a lump form in his throat. He looked back at his packed suitcase, then at the group of people waiting anxiously at his door. Their presence and their offer represented something he hadn't expected to find in this town, the possibility of change, however small and uncertain. Samuel stood for a moment, watching as the small group of townspeople began to set up their cleaning supplies around his car. The sight of them, ready to work together to erase the hateful message, stirred something deep within him. Mabel dipped a sponge into a bucket of soapy water, and began to scrub at the ugly words. Her wrinkled hands moved with determination, her face set in concentration. Next to her, Edna's husband started working on another section, his strong arms making quick work of the task. Samuel felt a gentle touch on his arm. It was Edna, holding out a clean rag to him. "Here," she said softly, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "Will you join us?" For a moment, Samuel hesitated. The pain of the past few days still felt raw, but as he looked at the group working on his car, he saw more than just an act of cleaning. He saw a community trying to wash away its mistakes to start anew. With a nod, Samuel took the rag from Edna and walked to his car. He began to scrub, his movements slow and deliberate at first. As he worked, he felt the tension in his shoulders start to ease. The hateful words began to fade under his efforts, and with them, some of the hurt they had caused. The group worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the splashing of water and the scrubbing of rags against metal. But gradually, conversation began to flow. People started to share stories, to laugh together. Samuel found himself joining in, sharing anecdotes from his military days that had the others chuckling. As the last of the graffiti disappeared, Samuel stepped back to look at his car. Where once there had been ugly, hurtful words, now there was only clean, shining paint. The transformation was more than just physical. It felt symbolic of something greater. Samuel turned to the group, his eyes moist with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. This means more than you know." Mabel reached out and squeezed his hand. "We're the ones who should be thanking you, Samuel, for not giving up on us, even when we gave you every reason to." As Samuel looked around at the faces of those who had come to help him, he realized something important. The act of cleaning his car together had done more than just remove hateful words. It had begun to wash away the barriers between them, creating a space for understanding and growth. In that moment, Samuel understood that change doesn't always come in grand gestures or sweeping reforms. Sometimes it starts with a bucket of soapy water, a willingness to admit mistakes, and the simple act of working together towards a common goal. Meanwhile, Charlie, the diner owner, sat alone in his office, his head in his hands. The weight of the recent events pressed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't shake the image of Samuel's dignified face as he stood in the diner, resplendent in his military uniform. The shame of his own inaction gnawed at him. Charlie picked up a framed photo from his desk. It showed the diner on its opening day, decades ago. Back then, it had seemed like a dream come true. Now it felt tainted by the ugly incident with Samuel. "This isn't what I wanted," Charlie muttered to himself. He set the photo down and stood up, pacing the small office. The sound of voices from the diner filtered through, reminding him of the business he'd built. But at what cost? As he walked, an idea began to form in Charlie's mind. It started small, just a flicker, but grew stronger with each step. By the time he reached the door, determination had set in. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Charlie called a staff meeting before the diner opened. The employees gathered, curious about the early summons. Charlie cleared his throat. "Folks, we've got some changes coming," he began. "First off, we're renaming the diner. From now on, it'll be known as Everyone's Place." A murmur ran through the group. "That's not all," Charlie continued. "We're also going to have mandatory diversity training for everyone. No exceptions." This time, there were a few groans. Charlie held up his hand. "I know it's a big change, but it's necessary. What happened to Samuel? It can't happen again. Not here. Not anywhere." As Charlie spoke, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in days, he felt hopeful. The diner could be more than just a place to eat. It could be a symbol of change, of progress. "We've got a chance to make things right," Charlie said, his voice growing stronger. "To make this diner a place where everyone feels welcome and respected. Are you with me?" One by one, the staff members nodded. Even Edna gave a small nod. Charlie smiled, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knew renaming the diner and instituting training were just the first steps. There was much more work to be done. But it was a start, a chance to turn a moment of shame into an opportunity for growth and healing. Charlie took a deep breath as he approached Samuel's house. His heart raced with a mix of nervousness and determination. He knew this conversation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Samuel opened the door, surprise flickering across his face when he saw Charlie standing there. "Mr. Davis," Charlie began, his voice shaky. "I was hoping we could talk." Samuel nodded, his expression guarded. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let Charlie enter. Once inside, Charlie wasted no time. "Mr. Davis, I want to make things right. I'm planning to rename the diner Everyone's Place and implement mandatory diversity training for all staff." Samuel's eyebrows shot up. He hadn't expected this. "That's quite a change," he said slowly. Charlie nodded eagerly. "It is. And I wanted to get your approval before moving forward." Samuel was quiet for a moment, studying Charlie's face. Was this genuine remorse, or just a business move to save face? The cynical part of him wondered if Charlie was only doing this to avoid bad publicity. "I appreciate the gesture, Charlie," Samuel said carefully. "But I have to ask, is this sincere, or are you just trying to protect your business?" Charlie's face fell. "I understand why you'd think that," he said softly. "Truth is, it's both. I do want to protect my business, but more than that, I want to make things right." "What happened to you?" It opened my eyes. "I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future better." As Samuel considered Charlie's words, there was a knock at the door. It was Mabel, her kind eyes crinkling with a smile as she saw the two men together. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I just wanted to check on you, Samuel." Samuel welcomed her in, briefly explaining Charlie's proposal. Mabel's face lit up. "Oh, Samuel," she said, taking his hand. "I know it might not seem like much, but the town is changing. It's slow, but it's happening. These changes Charlie's proposing, they're important steps forward." Samuel looked from Mabel to Charlie, seeing the earnestness in both their faces. He felt a glimmer of hope, fragile but real. "You really think this could make a difference?" he asked Mabel. She nodded firmly. "It's symbolic, yes, but symbols matter. It shows that people are willing to acknowledge past wrongs and work towards something better." Samuel turned back to Charlie. "All right," he said. "I appreciate you asking for my approval. It means a lot. Let's give this a try." Samuel took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, Charlie. I'll support your changes. Let's see if we can make this town a little better for everyone." Charlie's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. I promise I won't let you down." In the weeks that followed, the town buzzed with activity. The old diner sign came down and a new one went up. Everyone's Place. The fresh paint gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol of new beginnings. On the day of the grand reopening, Samuel stood nervously outside the diner. People from all over town were arriving, their faces a mix of curiosity and excitement. He spotted familiar faces, Marie, Mabel, even some of the regulars who had been silent during his initial mistreatment. Charlie approached Samuel, looking both nervous and proud. "Ready?" he asked. Samuel nodded, his heart pounding. Together, they cut the ribbon stretched across the diner's entrance. The crowd cheered, and people began to file in. Inside, the diner was transformed. The walls were adorned with photos showcasing the town's diverse history. The menu now featured dishes from various cultures, a small but meaningful change. As people found their seats, Samuel noticed something remarkable. The usual segregation that had existed in the town was dissolving. At one table, he saw Mabel chatting with a young black couple. At another, Edna's husband was sharing a laugh with Marie and her family. The smell of good food filled the air, and the sound of laughter and conversation created a warm atmosphere. Samuel felt a lump in his throat as he watched the scene unfold. It wasn't perfect, and he knew there was still a long way to go, but it was a start. Charlie stood up, tapping a glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for coming today," he began, "and I especially want to thank Samuel Davis for giving us a chance to do better." All eyes turned to Samuel. He felt a moment of panic, but then saw the warmth in people's faces. Slowly, he stood up. "I'm grateful for this opportunity," Samuel said, his voice steady. "This diner used to represent division, but today, I see it becoming a place where we can all come together. It's not about erasing the past, but about learning from it and moving forward together." A round of applause filled the diner. As Samuel sat down, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Edna, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was wrong, and I want to do better." Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. He reached up and patted her hand, a simple gesture of forgiveness. As the evening went on, Samuel looked around the diner, now full of life and unity. The place that had once turned him away was now a beacon of hope for the entire community. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a promising new beginning. As the weeks passed, Samuel's presence in the town began to grow beyond the initial incident at the diner. People started to see him not just as a victim of racism, but as a leader in their community. His quiet dignity and unwavering perseverance had left a lasting impression on many. One sunny afternoon, as Samuel was tending to his small garden, he heard a timid knock at his front gate. He looked up to see a group of teenagers, their faces a mix of nervousness and determination. "Mr. Davis?" one of them called out. "We were wondering if we could talk to you for a bit." Samuel wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded, gesturing for them to come in. As they gathered around his porch, he noticed their eager expressions. "What can I do for you?" he asked gently. The tallest boy, Jake, spoke up. "We've been learning about civil rights in school and, well, we wanted to hear from someone who's lived it, someone who's still fighting for change." Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise. He hadn't expected this, but he felt a warmth spreading in his chest. "I'd be happy to share what I know," he said, settling into his porch chair. For the next hour, Samuel talked with the teenagers. He shared stories from his time in the military, the discrimination he'd faced, and the recent events in town. The young people listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing their own experiences. As the conversation wound down, a girl named Lily spoke up. "Mr. Davis, how do you stay so strong? I don't know if I could be as calm as you were in that diner." Samuel smiled softly. "It's not always easy," he admitted. "But I've learned that true strength often comes from staying calm in the face of injustice. It's about dignity, not anger." The teenagers nodded, taking in his words. As they left, Samuel felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in a long time. These young people were eager to learn, to understand, and to make a difference. Word spread about Samuel's impromptu mentoring session, and soon, more young people were seeking him out. Some came with questions about history, others with personal struggles they wanted to discuss. Samuel found himself becoming a trusted advisor in the community, particularly for the younger generation. One day, as Samuel was walking through the town square, he overheard a conversation between two elderly men. "You see that Davis fellow?" one said to the other. "Never thought I'd say it, but he's doing good things for our town. Kids respect him, you know?" The other man nodded. "Times are changing, and maybe that's not such a bad thing after all." Samuel kept walking, a small smile playing on his lips. He realized that his fight for equality had made a lasting impact, not just in changing minds, but in inspiring the next generation to continue the work of building a more just community. Samuel sat at the counter of the newly renamed Everyone's Place, his fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The familiar aroma filled the air, but everything else felt different. Where once he had been met with cold stares and harsh words, now he was greeted with warm smiles and respectful nods. As he sipped his coffee, the bell above the door chimed. Samuel looked up to see Mabel entering, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners as she spotted him. She made her way over, settling onto the stool beside him. "Good morning, Samuel," Mabel said, her voice warm. "It's good to see you here." Samuel smiled back. "Good morning, Mabel. It's good to be here." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on how much had changed. The diner that had once been a symbol of division was now a place where people from all walks of life came together. The door chimed again and Marie walked in, her notebook tucked under her arm. She beamed when she saw Samuel and Mabel, quickly joining them at the counter. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Marie said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I just couldn't wait to share the news. The school board approved our proposal for a diversity and inclusion program." Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's wonderful news, Marie. Your hard work is really paying off." As they chatted, more familiar faces began to fill the diner. Charlie, the owner, bustled about, greeting everyone with a smile. Even Edna, who had once refused Samuel's service, now worked alongside her diverse co-workers with a newfound respect. Samuel looked around, taking in the scene. The diner buzzed with conversation and laughter, people of all ages and backgrounds sharing meals and stories. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to overcome, but the progress was undeniable. "You know," Samuel said softly, turning back to Marie and Mabel, "I never thought I'd see the day when this town could come together like this. We've still got a long way to go, but—" Marie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "But we're moving in the right direction, one step at a time." Mabel reached out, patting Samuel's hand. "And it's thanks to people like you, Samuel. Your courage and dignity showed us all a better way." Samuel felt a warmth spread through his chest. He looked at Marie, seeing the determination in her eyes, and at Mabel, whose quiet support had meant so much. In that moment, surrounded by the community he had helped foster, Samuel felt a deep sense of hope. If you enjoyed the story of Samuel, Marie, and Edna, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.